All right, it is 10 o'clock and we are here for a budget workshop with our airport director. With that, we'll turn it over to Director Shuck, and the comptroller is going to have it online so we can see where we are there.
Okay. We'll start with revenues, potential anticipated projected revenues. We should see an increase, a slight increase at Priest River, and depending on how we can end this year, we may see a significant increase in lease lot revenue at Sandpoint. We did lease 2 more lots this past year. I'll have a memo for you folks here next week or so on the last one. And those lots are leasing for $2,700 a year. So there's 2 of those, which we didn't have that revenue in 25. And then if we can end the year with a bit of a budget surplus, what I'd like to do is hire the surveyor to survey the lots, the new lots at Sandpoint Airport, which we anticipate will cost about $40,000 to do that survey, to find those lots, put marks in the ground, corner pins in the ground, and legal descriptions for the leases. When that happens, we will be able to lease these lots. There's 6 of them that are under development in kind of the southeast corner of the airport, or could be under development. And the revenue generated from those will be about $60,000 a year once we have those leased. So if we can get those, the survey work done, the legal descriptions, get the RFPs out for those the end of this fiscal year, those would be presumably leased. The majority of them would be leased over the winter and construction beginning in the summertime, next summer. We don't care when construction starts. I mean, there's a requirement in the lease to be quick about it. I think it's 18 months. They have to be into the construction once they sign the lease. But once they sign the lease, they're making the payments anyway. So that would be a fairly significant increase in revenue for 26 if we can make that happen. We may have enough left in this year's budget to hire that survey work done in this year's budget because we did not have a significant snow year. So we saved a lot of money in fuel and repairs on equipment, which we would normally otherwise see. So, and we have a new contract for our navigation aids that we did not know would be reduced as significantly when we went through the budget process yet last year. So we set aside $35,000 in our repairs and maintenance, that's 7501, for a maintenance contract that the FAA requires us to carry. During the summer of last year, the FAA decommissioned most of the navigational aids that we had, ground-based navigational aids that we had, and went to all GPS approaches, space-based approaches. So it allows us to not, A, we can sell what equipment we have that's not obsolete, which is a portion of it, and B, we don't have to have that huge maintenance contract. It was a $30,000 maintenance contract just to have them on call. And it was additional if they came out to work on the equipment. So now, with our reduced navigation aids, ground-based navigation aids, that contract is about, I think it's $6,300. So there's about $2,700 in that line item that I won't be spending this year, which we may be able to use along with some of the savings in fuel and repairs to fund the survey work that would allow us to sell these lots and generate that revenue. I won't really know that until probably August.
This is the same survey that we looked at last budget.
Yes.
And we didn't do. And so my only question on this, because this was one where I was going to say, should we start developing a fund where we save up for that survey if we can't get it done? Do you think that we'll have any issue leasing the lots once the survey is complete? Do you think interest will go down?
We have a lot of verbal interest.
Okay.
As you know, that changes sometimes when I have to write a check. So, but the initial investment from our side, in the leasing, these lots are going to be in the neighborhood of $4,000 a year, give or take, maybe $5,000 a year, depending on the size of the lots. that's not a significant check to write for the person who's leasing the lot. It's the construction that needs to follow that is
Yeah.
significant in all of these. These are probably all of them $1 million investments, give or take, in the buildings, is the size of the buildings themselves.
That's why I'm asking, because that's where the big issue is are people going to be investing in the airport hangar itself?
We do have a fair amount of interest. I've had two guys that want to do these bigger lots, the larger hangars.
18 cents.
Yeah, those are 8,000 square foot hangars, 80 by 100. I've had two guys after me for a couple of years that want to build on those lots again. And they're local guys, and they're both have businesses. They're both good businessmen, so they understand what's going on and what the cost would be. They've both done development before, so they know construction costs. So I kind of count those guys as likelies because there's not going to be a lot of surprises for them. Mm-hmm. The challenge we have when we have what I would say is amateurs coming in to develop lots on the airport is that they have no idea of the cost of doing this sort of thing and the complexity. And that really does slow down development.
Okay.
Everybody thinks they can build a hangar for $100,000 and it's at least triple that. Just due to not just necessarily the airport, but construction costs, permit fees, engineering, all that stuff, it just adds up so significantly.
Are you looking at buying any easements
Yes,
in particular?
yes. We have some easement acquisitions, primarily in Sandpoint. Looking at what we have planned for next year at Priest, and it looks like next year is going to be needs to be primarily pavement maintenance, which will be an FAA grant, so then our portion is typically less than 5% of that cost. And we're contemplating about $300,000 for pavement maintenance at Priest. So we'll end up with, I like to budget in the county match, I like to budget for 10% because that's the worst case scenario. If only the way the system works, the feds come in with 90%, the state kicks in generally between 5 and 7.5%. So we're on the hook for 2.5 to 5% is how it has worked in my time here. Though the FAA and the state will both tell you that the state money is not guaranteed. So I like to budget for the 10% that we may be our county match. We have never in my time here, in probably 30 grants, had to have that amount. We usually have between 2.5 and 5%. In Sandpoint, we do have land acquisition that we will have to kick to next year. We're hoping to get it done this year, but we just ran out of time. We have to have those grants in by June 4th. And in land acquisition, you have to do all of the work. So let me back up a little bit. All of our FAA grants are reimbursement grants. So we spend the money and they reimburse us. In construction grants, that's generally not a problem because the grant is in place and we then pay the contractor when we get a pay request, and within a week or so, we get reimbursed from the FAA. So there's not a lot of float time in there. In land acquisition, there's a lot of float time in there because we have to do all of the work prior to receiving the grant. We have to do all of the negotiating the purchase and sale agreements. We have to do any survey work. We have to do any work that has to be done to adjust lot lines or anything like that. So there's a significant amount of upfront cost before they will issue a grant. And one of the things that we're running into here lately is that in land acquisition, I had only been setting aside our 10%, not enough to use the county match as that cash flow account.
Excuse me.
So we have that happening this year, and we will have it happen next year as well, where right now, I can't enter any more invoices against the county match because we've used most of it, 80% of it. So one of the things that I want to talk with you about and with Jessica and Mike here as well is how we can use what essentially would be a cash flow account only during land acquisition. I say only during land acquisition, but we've been acquiring land at both airports for the last 7 years, and we've got another 3 years or so to do that. So it's pretty much all the time. Can we, and one of the things I was thinking of, would it be acceptable from your standpoint as well to increase the dollar value of the county match to cover those preliminary invoices prior to receiving the grant, knowing that that's a cash flow? Our portion won't be that much. Like, for instance, this year, it should be probably $150,000. Our portion of the acquisition will only be about $25,000. But we need to have that flow mechanism so that we can pay those invoices prior to receiving the grant and then be reimbursed.
I think that we have to do it that way, otherwise you can't actually move forward with it, and you end up hitting the ceiling of it. I think that that's the reason I probably jumped ahead of you on easements is we have to have a plan in place that allows us to actually make the acquisitions that we need to make in a timely fashion to also address the market fluctuations and when is the right time to be able to make those actual grabs versus, because your job is to do what's in the best interest of the county, which is always, we can only pay what it's worth, nothing more, nothing less, but we also want to hit it when it's the least amount of expense for the county, which means you have to have that available fund available to you. Because I had on my list of asking everybody, do you need a capital improvement? Do you need a balance that allows that flexibility? And in yours, I had on that survey because of an income revenue stream, but also on easements, because we have some people that know that we need to buy their easement for additional expansion, and we're never able to say when we can do that because it doesn't rise to the level of we need to do it or we can do it, but it's still on there. And I'd like to be able to start making those expansions, because the point of that, both airports, is that they need to be self-sustaining, which means they do have to have that growth that you need in order to continue to attract multi-million-dollar investment in the development of these hangars. So I am agreeable to that, to increasing that with some that very clear guidelines as to why we're increasing the county match portion, so that it's not just a match portion, but it's the development that's necessary in order to achieve the grant, so that it's very clearly stated for the record of future boards to understand why there's a shift, because whenever you see those changes, people sometimes don't really understand why those changes happen. That way there's a record.
And to understand we may be having all of the outlay in 1 year, but not receiving the reimbursement until the following year.
Yes, and so that there's a clear pathway of where the money's going and why we're doing it. And maybe the purchase is right now, but we know we're not, or the work is needing to be done now, but we might not be able to purchase it until the next fiscal year, depending on how money happens.
What would the dollar amount be for that?
Sorry?
What would the dollar amount be for that?
For this year, it'd probably be $150,000.
For 26.
Yes,
Which is a
what we
change
should.
from what?
Well, last year we had 75 in county match.
So moving it to 150.
I think 150, I talked with our engineers about, and we're guessing because,
I don't know.
we're, but I think 150 would be all right because there is some timing that we can manipulate a little bit.
Could the other part of that be, if there's some other expenditures like the survey work, like potentially equipment that I see a note in here about, could we align the timing so that we have these additional funds up front to fund the acquisition, and then as the match dollars come in to backfill that account, we move it into the right line to make the other expenditures that are needed? So it's just more of a timing issue versus.
I think this line should stay this line though, because then the next budget, then you don't need to ask as much.
I think it would be clearer if we could keep it in one line.
We don't want to move from line to line like that because it allows us to know and actually to better judge what needs to be in that line. So if on recommendation of engineers, the move is from 75 to 150 for that purpose, then the next budget cycle, we're going to look at what was proposed, what was actual, and did you actually need it versus I wanted it to stay at 150, which is still could be a market fluctuation recommendation, but that if you only actually spent 90, then you might hear, oh, well, I want to bump it down to 130. But it's able to be tracked very clearly because what you don't want is just somebody to be able to build up a line that they're not actually using. And we can't clearly see that if we move it. Clerk
Dave?
Rosedale, can I ask you do you have that microphone?
Yeah,
There.
so if you have any idea on the timing of when that would be coming back, it would enable us to either just use everything from your cash account and then only levy on the part that wouldn't survive if you're getting tight, or just levy for the actual match part ultimately, not the upfront part. It would just save our overall levy envelope a little bit if you could give us your 80% thought on that at some point.
I think that needs to happen, as well as you need to have a future forecast of what you're actually anticipating needing to do grants for. Not that it's just an open-ended fund, but
Right.
these are the easements that we're potentially going to need to do our groundwork for. This is where we're going to start, so that when we're in that budget cycle, it's very clear what's being worked on. That way, if you come to a point where, wait, an extra amount of money is available, it's not just, it's that we're clearly doing the project we've budgeted for, not I had extra money therefore, because I hate that comment in budget cycles. A budget means you actually budgeted for it, not that you just have money, and since it's in my budget, I can call it budgeted. Because that's also part of how this county has operated, is just saying, well, it's there. But it needs to be, no, you planned to spend that money, not that you just planned to have money. Those are different things. And I think we have to, on your end, and you'd have to be able to do that anyhow to know what projects you're going to work on. But that needs to be clearly stated in the fiscal year that we're going to be approving, whatever that dollar amount is, so that it's earmarked for those projects. So that when we come to the next cycle, if it doesn't get spent, we can ask the questions of why didn't it get spent and justify why we renew that or that we don't do it. Does that make sense?
It does to me. In fact, it would be great to, if we have the overarching plan, then we can look at basically in each budget cycle, what's our percent complete toward the overall goal. To, like you're saying, to know how much more we need to float for the coming year. And or if we have an opportunity in a given year within that planned budget to pull something forward a year, get it done sooner. So that makes sense to me.
Or even to increase based on the fluctuations. And you might see that it creates a better opportunity for us to do more if we had a bigger plan that had that availability. And it might have some streamline of, if I floated these three at the same time with this same person doing the work that I need to prepare, it might actually reduce overall cost if we were doing a project lined up for a person versus saying, like the small scale, when you can fit me into your schedule, can you come out and pour my concrete? Well,
Scale
if I've got
efficiency.
you multiple times. So I like that idea, but with the parameters and the very clear documentation from the board as to why we'd shift that way, so that the clerk's office can maintain that understanding.
So one comment on that, I agree with the goal to have expenses budgeted for in a year and not just that you've got money in your budget. At some point, and that works for the vast majority of the budget, at some point you hit such a level of minutia that you can't budget for those things. I mean, miscellaneous account has been done. So the commissioners should decide at some point how they want to deal with that kind of a thing. Otherwise, if we don't, I can't think of a good example, other than if you budget what you think you're going to hit on every line item, there's a good chance one of them is going to be over and one of them is going to be under on all the myriad of items. And if you try to budget it just perfectly, you're going to find yourself upside down because you don't actually have remaining budget authority for those that you went over on, right? Kind of a thing. So and we have had a little elasticity there. So anyway, just a thought, not to be addressed now, but just.
I'll tell you, because I've thought about what bothers me about Bonner County budget, and it's that it's been too loose in terms of requiring stuff. When you have a project, it's easy actually to say these are the projects, because you're not holding them to the dollar amount per se, you're holding to, this is what you earmark the money for. We've seen this historically in the county where people move money saying, I have money that I can move for this reason, but they never brought it up as a discussion. And so that means that when we sit in budget time, whatever you give to one department, you're taking away from a different department. And as is government, oftentimes you use the item that allows you to extract the money, and then you move it to something else.
I agree
People are
completely.
historically frustrated with that process. So in part, that's part of what my goal is to not allow as much of that that has been happening, recognizing that there is a significant amount of each person's budget that is going to be, you can't go drill down that far, but we owe it to not just taxpayers, but also other departments to say, if you're going to be able to go from 750 to 150, you have to account that the money was spent for what you said it needed to be spent for and not moved around to, well, I've got an additional $75,000 here, so now I can do this.
100%.
His is different because he'd have to do that, but some of these other departments do that and then it doesn't get spent, and then we get a request for something at the end of the budget year to draw down money that shouldn't have been there because that's not what we budgeted for.
An example would be like travel for the commissioners. If it turned out you made the best budgeting plan possible, but then ICRIM asks you to come down 3 times,
Yeah.
then
And I think that's understandable. I think that we owe it to address the concern that he brings forth as the director for this line, but also to say there needs to be some guardrails for, that's a huge increase in budget.
Projects.
And it needs to be project specific and not just, because it might be that none of the projects go through for one reason or another. There might be people not willing to do the work because they're just too busy because they have bigger projects. So when that money stays there, we need to know, we still have these 3 projects that need to be done.
Yeah, and to that end, the other way I could look at it is, I completely agree that I don't think it's a good fiscal approach to just anytime mid-year say, I have available funds and there's this new shiny thing that looks interesting. However, to me, it's like going out and bidding a project. If you already know that there are things that may not fit within your budget that would be very valuable to the county for that department, to bid it like a job where you have alternates, to say, I've identified in advance, these are things that would be very valuable and helpful. And here are the reasons why I think these are good things to be able to have expenditures against. But if it works out that we can't because of other costs being higher this year, then those are things that are lower priorities on my list, so I'm just not going to get them done. But if we spend less money on fuel because of the way the winter went, or something else happens and bids came in better than we anticipated, and I have some actual room left within that budget, I've already identified in priority things I would like to accomplish. To me, that's just good planning, and that would, I think, hit both of the things that I'm hearing. We would have more flexible planning, and we'd also be saying, if you didn't already have it on the list and we didn't already discuss it, then you really shouldn't be asking for it. So I think it would address both, if I'm understanding.
Yeah, I think it would.
Even if it's a shiny new object, right?
It can be shiny if it has a really, really good ROI for the county.
So the ones that are typically variables for us are basically line 7,000 through 7510, which is fuels and repairs and maintenance for the equipment, airfield, nav aid, airfield equipment, electrical equipment, that sort of thing. One of the benefits of being a hand-me-down department is you get a lot of stuff for a relatively low acquisition.
Yes.
But you then have all the cost of repairs of that old hand-me-down equipment. And we've been milking our equipment well, but there are things that happen with old equipment, as we all know, that you're going to have some failures. The other variable we have is the one we were just talking about a moment ago in terms of acquisition. And that has to do with willing sellers. We have, by federal acquisition regulations, a limit to what we can pay. And it has to be the appraised value, review appraised values. There's a little bit of wiggle room with the FAA in that, but it's not significant. So when we do these appraisals and we go to talk with sellers, often they have a different idea of the value of their property than the appraiser does. We had that very much happen this year. So, which is one of the reasons we're moving our land acquisition into next year. We just could not come to an agreement with the seller. We have had negotiations go on for more than 4 years with some sellers. The grants have a 4-year open window. So at the end of that 4-year period, if you haven't major transactions, we're done and we got to close this grant and go to another grant, which the FAA is willing to do because almost all of these acquisitions are safety concerns. So they're very willing to work on that. That's the easements and the acquisitions around the runway protection zones. They're all safety concerns. They have not given us any money, well, they haven't given us very much money, I shouldn't say any, for development. They did give us a grant this year for the development out of Priest River, which is completed. There's another phase coming to that, but very little of the money that we get from the FAA for acquisition is for development. It's almost all for safety concerns, so that's very high on their list. When those projects, those acquisition projects run multiple years, that's when we may have a challenge with explaining the reasoning or having what we see as leftover money that we didn't use this year. Well, we tried to, we just couldn't come to an agreement with those sellers. So as long as we have an understanding with this board and future budgets that that's going to be a variable that we're going to have until we're done with acquisition, which right now we have acquisition going into 2032. And we do have a long-term capital improvement plan for both airports that goes out to about 2032. That's about as far as the FAA is willing to, it gets a little murky after that because projects move around somewhat. And those, we talked about that at the last advisory board meeting. There's about $19 million in terms of, for both airports. So our portion of that's going to be close to $2 million over the next 7 years. Tying down which year each of those projects is going to happen in is challenging. We do know the year before. I mean, we do know as we get closer to the date or the projected date, clarity becomes better and better. So like this year, we know what we're going to acquire next year. We know what we're going to do in terms of pavement maintenance. So that's fairly easy for us to budget for. Knowing what's going to happen in 28 or 29, that's harder for us to.
Do we have, and I don't remember this one, looking at this one, did we have an account to set aside our portion of the 2 million that's necessary once we approach that final? Because I don't recall seeing that.
That's the county match. That would
Right,
be the line, and what
That's-
we would do is each year, I would come to you and say, next year, we're going to do this.
but we don't have that now. And so,
I can give you, basically,
We don't have that value, you mean, right?
Yeah.
For
I can
the,
give you these, which are the capital improvement plan estimates.
no, do we have a capital improvement account for this
Oh.
project? I don't believe that we do. And so this is similar to other projects where the county knows we're going to be faced with the need to pull out 2 million and kind of we're saying, well, we might just get that 2 million down there. But that's not making the best return on our money because we could create a capital improvement account, draw interest as we put our money in it towards that area and help us get to that spot faster if we said, and then what the reason I like that kind of account is it allows future boards and people to know, because you know who's going to be here by the time that project comes. But if that account is set up specifically for that project that we know, that's what that money is there for. So it removes the guesswork of figuring out what the prior boards were doing. And this is that, if I remember, this is that project where it's like 20, it's not in this, it's like 6, 7, 8 years down the road, right?
Yeah, that's an
Potential
accumulated
complete-
total
Yeah, but,
over that. But
right, but,
I think the biggest single year that we would need to match is going to be about 600,000 when they do the runway.
right. So we should have an account that allows us to gain interest on money so that we're putting the money away so that we have the money available and it's not a big hit to that particular budget.
But that'd only be $30,000, right?
No,
5%,
600.
Our
Our portion.
is 600.
Oh,
If our portion, it's
I
not
get
a,
it, all right.
it's not a little drop in the bucket, so
Different order of
we,
magnitude.
Yeah.
we need
We
to
need to start saving for
having
it.
the accounts for every department that has something like this needs to have that kind of account that can accrue.
So would it be,
I didn't know we could even do that.
Did you-
with the
Excuse me?
capital expenditure account, is there any issue with drawing from that account in the future for a grant
different
match?
project?
Or do we have to, do we have to move it into the grant match account for the next year when we know that it's going to actually come up? Is that?
It's not specific to the project, it's specific to the idea of a capital improvement. And so that's what I would like us to look at, can we do that with the airport, dealing with the federal government and whatnot for that particular project so that we're planning
Yeah.
it? Because my question on that for you is, as it gains its interest, can you pull interest off of it for other projects that we would have that could benefit us? So one of the comments that when I was talking to Road and Bridge, because this same thing came up for something he needed, then the treasurer asked, well, how does he get the money back? Because you can't just give it to him. It can go into general fund and then be given back. That's just how you set it up. So
Right,
we
so
just
all
need
the
to,
money, the actual money would be sitting in the general fund and the cash accounts being interest.
and then it
They
goes,
would have so much designated to each department.
He's reallocated it when it was time to make the
Correct. The treasurer,
expenditure
yep.
to the correct, okay.
but it would be a specific, like with this project across the street, you could have done that kind of account kind of deal.
And
So
actually be
that's-
gaining interest in,
Yeah, and so when we know we have a big hit like that, instead of feeling like it hit our actual budget for that fiscal year, we would have been saving for it the whole
Right.
time, knowing that's our direction.
so how many airport improvement related projects are you currently planning for within that total dollar amount you're discussing?
12.
Because ideally, we'd say, what's our anticipated start of expenditure for that project? And how many years do we have between now and then, right? And divide that cost between each year and then add all those up for each fiscal year to say, can we put that much into the capital account in fiscal year 26, fiscal year 27? Because it'll be a little different for each year as we're saving, doing that kind of sinking fund toward each project.
Well, with.
Well, as long
each-
as they don't move around too much.
Yeah, you can't,
Because like acquisition is the most.
No,
variable
understood,
one.
but it's any plan, right? All
Right,
plans are
right.
subject to change, but you
Right.
have a starting point, so
Right.
how do you build a budget toward it?
in each
multi-year?
budget cycle, you would do that. You
Yeah.
we
Yeah,
wouldn't say,
reassess.
well, yeah, because one of the things, so this was my other comment of, we had this project that could potentially give us revenue. If we can make it without pulling that money, we could be saying all of the additional funds that come from the new lease lots could be getting put into that type of an account for future projects. And then what could be happening is potentially then the interest that you gain as that dollar amount goes up can decrease the money that you're pulling out of our county budget for those projects, which is my end goal. Because then you become more self-sustainable, and then it's not all on the county taxpayer. It is paying for its use, and then the money that we're giving you out of budget, it goes.
So so that money, if I understand correctly, would be sitting in the general fund?
Well, it'll always be in your airport
Three,
fund.
the three.
It'll be in.
003.
Well, even if you.
It's not general as in have access to use it.
Right.
It wouldn't be that. It would.
It's allocated to the airport,
Yes.
but in a
Yes, it just
general
doesn't, correct.
fund. Okay, I get you.
So it's not that the county has access to it.
Right.
It's that that's the way that type of account works.
Okay.
So I would like
You're
to.
talking about, the bank account with it, that is sitting into accrue interest versus the line
so-
item budget
I
that's
get it, okay.
allocated
But
to.
what they're talking about are these new.
If I'm tracking
And so-
correctly, because I'm figuring this out.
So because
I didn't even know we could do
currently,
that.
because currently, like I messaged Jason, I said, look, interest rates are going up for some opportunities, like should the county be saying CDs right now with JP Morgan Chase are 4% for 4 months? That's not that long of a period of time. I don't know what the rules are, but if you've got $1 million that you could sit in a 4-month CD at 4% return, we could be moving your county in a faster direction. And so that doesn't, I comment on it in this budget because I think this budget cycle needs to create that. and come up with how much out of this next fiscal year budget do we put into an account like that, so we start preparing for that over $500,000 hit that we're going to see. That's why I bring that up, and because you always have some kind of project like that.
Yes.
And that would help us to have a future plan that reduces
Right.
the need on the,
So I have a spreadsheet similar to this that goes out for both airports for the next 8 years. And it has all of the essentially, here's what we think we're going to need over the course of that time. So it includes new snow removal equipment, snow removal shed, because those things we're going to need those. They're not high on the list, but we're going to need them. Land acquisition, runway rehab at both airports, taxiways at both airports. No development acquisitions in there. This is all just necessary stuff. So how would you like to make this happen? Should I present that to all of you and say, here's our plan for the next 7 years? Like I said, it gets a little vague when you get out more than 2 or 3 years because things move around.
But in my mind, that's where you have to start, right? Because you know things will change, but if you were to lay all that out and then prorate that back, so whatever you anticipate, we know, won't be 100%, you anticipate the implementation year to be, prorate it back to fiscal year 26 start, so we see how many dollars per year we need for each one.
Yeah.
Then we see the sum total, and then we can decide, can we fund that in fiscal year 26 to start building the capital budget that Commissioner Williams is talking about. To me, that's the best way to plan, because otherwise it's too heavy of a lift when we get to that year, 4 or 5 years from now, we go, yeah, we really need to do that. We just don't have that much available.
well, and I also think if you did it that way, it allows for a very clear point in time that we can reference of, what did Dave say about this? Because that's part of what we are struggling with when you're going back in time on the ambulance district is, what did all these other hands have in it? And I think if we did that as a master plan in terms of kind of the financial growth of the projects, I think that would be beneficial to the county as a whole to see the direction, but also for the pilots and the people that want to be purchasing these lease slots are also an option there.
Yeah.
And we can publish that on our website, on our webpage. The thing I struggle with that is too much information with too vague a deadlines, and I don't mean that from us, I mean that from the public perception standpoint. You said you were going to do this. Once you publish it, it's written in stone for the public.
Sure.
Like I said, you said in 2017, you're going to do it. 2037, you're going to do this. Well, no, this is a plan.
And some
this
people will
is
feel that
variable.
way, right?
Right.
And we say that, we put that in writing in
Well, sure.
every long-range plan, right? There's no possible way you'll ever hit everything that you anticipated.
And nobody believes it.
But I think it's also in having the board and the communication from the airport be very clear of what is the conversation about and how we label it and how we communicate it will help to see this is the desired direction versus the direction, so that people know
Right.
that the disclaimer of there's opportunity for all of this to change,
Yep.
but in part, this is the direction so that people can give input, but then it has the disclaimer there. And I think that
makes
that
sense.
would be beneficial to the county as a whole too, because it's
Sure.
not, we know what the potential moving parts are.
And we could even be clear too with the language to say that this shall be reevaluated at a minimum every year during the budget cycle, right? Because we can't tie future boards. All we're doing is saying, this was the thinking we used to develop the current budget.
Right.
What happens in the future is anyone's guess, but at least we had a reasoned, rational, decision-making process to come to that. And people can dislike it or challenge it, but we can clearly articulate why we did it that way.
So when I say things get murky, when I talk about this 7-year plan, what I mean is the dates of execution get murky, not the projects themselves. They're pretty well set. They are what we need.
Mm-hmm.
Both airports have a master plan, and that's a requirement from the FAA. And the master plans look out 20 years, and they contemplate what you have, what your inventory is now, what forecasting we can use use that would be most effective or most accurate for that particular airport. And then they forecast out what is going to be needed in terms of, you're going to need this many more hangars of this size, you're going to need this many more taxiways. At some point you have to do this, some point you have to do that. So it's really a very comprehensive plan and it's published on our webpage as well for each airport. So you can look at that and see exactly what our plan is for a 20-year planning window. And we are now 10 years into both of those.
I think that's, I think, a little bit different than looking at the financial plan,
Right.
because those plans change based on what hits the airport. A piece of litigation is going to change what our appetite is for a
Right.
county match on something, for example. So I think that that is the foundation of the direction, but then how do we get there is what we're talking about from a budgetary standpoint.
Absolutely.
And then if every budget year, if we took it from that position, then the first year that you have that explanation is difficult. But once you retrain the mindset of the community and the organization to say, we're reevaluating what our past objectives and goals were based on what our proposed versus actuals were, then it becomes the new standard, and what people should expect in terms of how we're going to deal with an ever-changing area, because it's a specific area that is dependent on it's an investment opportunity for people that have a lot to invest on some of this, and some people that just have it as a hobby, which is still a lot, but the range of investment is very different based on what size hangar you're talking about. And I think that that's what we have to start explaining and planning for, so that we don't miss the opportunity for the multimillionaire to build a really huge hangar for the county, which is why we talked about reducing the lease, looking at lowering the lease terms and making sure that as we move forward, the lease rates are based on the value, not anything less than the value of it. So I think that's a good plan going forward. And that part is just to work with the county clerk on what accounts allow us to save for those capital projects, because once we hit the year where our 600 is due, that's a lot of money that was not saved.
Yeah, I think the idea of a financial long-range plan that supports the two master plans is perfect, because then it's all tied together.
Yeah, and it's very visible.
Exactly.
And it's understood.
Nothing's a surprise.
And it becomes the business plan for the airports, that
Right.
here's how we're doing this. Yeah, absolutely. And so the master plans are already on there. What I can do then is put up the capital improvement plans with some narrative about what this means, that it is somewhat variable. We will know probably on a 2-year lead time, what's going to happen in the next 2 years. And that's best forecasting we have at the moment.
Gotcha.
And here's how we can fund those opportunities. Absolutely.
Okay. What are your other big changes?
I don't see that there's going to be a lot of big changes. I want to move, you may remember last year we moved money out of repairs and maintenance airfield and out of pavement rehabilitation into capital equipment, because we bought a very expensive trailer that allows us to move equipment between the two airports. I would like to move that back, so there'll be no change in the bottom line. They'll just be back. Those allocations will be slightly different. We don't anticipate needing to acquire any capital equipment this year. Those funds need to go back into the pavement maintenance, because what we did is just deferred maintenance. And that's one of the challenges we run into at both airports, is the maintenance has been deferred for decades. And I mentioned at the advisory board meeting, we have 27 acres of pavement at Sandpoint Airport, other 13 out at Priest. And some of it dates back to the late 80s. And it's that dead and dying. A lot of it has
Double
been.
its life cycle.
The county has been able to do a lot of work there. We have most of the pavement replaced at Sandpoint. So the bulk of that has been replaced in the last 10 years. And now we're just in a maintenance mode for those sections. There's a couple of places we need to do a little work, but the bulk of that's done. I would say 90% of that's done. Priest is another story. Some of it is our requirement. Some of it will be funded through grants from the FAA. We do have a requirement in the grant assurances that we develop a pavement maintenance plan and fund it and adhere to it. Once they give us all that big pavement, they want us to take care of it. Totally understandable. And we do have those in place. Sometimes you can go back to the FAA and say, hey, can you fund, like a priest, can you give us, let's say, $300,000 for payment maintenance? And if they are able, they will. And we have that actually as one of our grant opportunities next year. So they're helping us even maintain it, even though we're supposed to be maintaining it. So priest is a little bit more raggedy around the edges than Sandpoint is in terms of pavement, so we're going to be working on those things. But I don't see, in terms of budgets at either place, the biggest changes are going to be in incoming revenue, not in expenses that we have to do anything about that is going to be a big change for us. Unless we have some major piece of equipment die like we did with the snow blower a couple years ago.
I was going to ask you, are you thinking anything about?
Actually, we're in fairly good shape right now. The equipment we have is in pretty good shape. The snow blower is the most expensive and complicated one, and we did a major overhaul of that 2 years ago.
We haven't used it,
And we
so
didn't
we
have to
don't
use
know
it.
how well it is.
No,
That's
we
the
used
problem.
it. No, we know
We
it's in good
didn't
shape.
really use it like
Not this year.
hugely use it.
Well, last year we did use it, and it is in good condition. But it is a 20-year-old piece of equipment that is huge and complicated, and
Commissioner Domke didn't get to hear all the disclaimers.
yeah, and we
He had
don't.
that sitting in a shop for a long time, so I don't feel like we really vetted the repair. Okay,
So anyway, to answer, long answer to your short question is, I don't see a lot of increases. Like I said, I'd like to move those dollar values around in those lines to go back to where we were. And then the 150,000 for the cash flow account for the county match would be the biggest one.
what is the probability that this fiscal year we can do the surveying of the lots at Sandpoint?
In 25.
Yeah,
In the
I
current
think he
budget.
was saying it's close.
80%?
we were 80% that we could do it.
I think so.
Okay.
If we don't have, no, I say that, and then just 2 weeks ago, yeah, we had a failure of some of our navigation aid equipment that we have to pay for, which is $5,000. So hopefully that won't happen,
Okay.
more of that sort of thing. I don't see a lot of wear and tear on the maintenance equipment, our trucks and tractors and loaders and stuff. We're gonna have to buy tires for one of them, that's a significant expense. We'll have to buy wheels for one of the loaders, that's a significant expense. That might
Can we
be
look
somewhat
at-
discretionary.
Can you look at those numbers and see what your potential for tires and what that potential dollar amount looks like? Because in one end, my mind is cycling towards, if there's a possibility of getting the survey done this year, then you could start making the calls of who wants to rent these out because our survey is done and lock in the leases so that we don't want to go through a downturn
Right.
in the economy such that the $1 million investment option goes away.
And hold on.
Yes, and so right now, that's not where we
Right.
are. And so if we can pull that off this year and attract because some of these, there's no option, those will stay empty if you do not attract that on the executive row. But if we're going to put out the 40, it makes sense to do it sooner than later so that you don't hit a market
Yeah,
problem.
let's take a good look at it, Dave, and see kind of what the deficit would be for getting that up and running this year.
And in a worst case scenario, while it's a little less efficient on the front end, can we break it into two projects? And because if lots 17 and 18, for example, you believe you have a very high level of interest by parties right now,
Again,
understood, no guarantee, but if that's the case and we don't have full funding capability, do we just break it into two phases, try to get the ones where we think there's a higher probability of initial investment ready to occur to capture that?
I don't know if I would say that there's a higher probability, because when we talked about at the last advisory board meeting about the whole idea of condos, building condominiumized hangars, there was a lot of interest in that. And that has since been talked about at both airports, and some of the board members think there's a really good likelihood that there is going to be enough people that can do that.
Nice.
So it's probably similar. I would prefer to do, obviously, the entire project.
Right.
And my 40 is a guess. I need to talk with the surveyor about it and show him this and say, here's what we're looking at.
Okay.
He may come in less than that. I think we have room in the budget this year to take care of that, barring any unforeseen repairs or damages. We have some.
We'll just close the airport.
We have some expenses right now for land acquisition that we were hoping to take care of this year, that I have to work with Jessica on about how we can get that, because we've used up most of the county match to fund those. But there's still more invoices coming in from the appraisers and survey work and stuff like that. So there's a little bit of a cash flow thing right now that I need to nail down to understand if we do have that money, but it looks like it. It looks like we do right now. And there are some things I can put off, like for instance, we haven't used an awful lot of the airfield maintenance. There's 42,000 still sitting in that. I can defer that maintenance again. We do have a $13,000 that you guys just approved last week coming up that I have to pull out of that. But there may be enough room in some of the other accounts to.
And if we can't, it's fine. That was in my mind of.
Oh, I definitely agree.
It's based on the ups and downs of a market.
There's a consumer
And so
confidence issue there.
If we hit a bad patch, then the argument could be it's not the time to survey it, because we're not going to be able to at least extract what we would get out of the survey, because this is not, $4,000 a year isn't a lot per lot. It's that it's the project as a whole.
Sure.
And the eventual, but that's not seen for 20 years? Am I knocking you down to 20, or are we still at 50,
No,
30,
we're not going
40?
to get to 20. Nice idea, but it's not going to happen.
50 years, but that's where we actually
Right.
see the return on our investment. And so to spend $40,000 means we have to get something back. And in part, we have to look at the market fluctuations, and that if there's an appetite, and maybe it's do a check with the surveyor to double check what the cost for the full project is, because there's a return cost of having you survey to breaking the project up. But it's reasonable to look at both what your options are, and then to look at maybe touching base with some of the pilots for this is an interest. Do we have people that have an interest in this, so that the county can determine should we move forward at this time? And we might get enough feedback that's not guaranteed, but interest that says it's reasonable for us to make this happen now because of the potential projections as a revenue stream would more than pay for us doing it now if we had the flexibility to do it now. That's all I want us to, and if we don't do it now, to say why we didn't do it now, and that way, that's part of doing a budget, is to say why we do and don't do things. And I think that would help too.
Dave, when you're breaking up the lots for the hangars, have you talked with some of the wealthiest potential buyers? Because if you had a double-sized lot, that you might get triple the pay. I don't know, at least, I don't know, it may be of extreme value to somebody to get a huge lot. Just a thought.
It's that million.
Yes.
I think you were out when he was talking about that. It's the $1 million.
Yeah.
And
Okay, that's great.
he's got the image there.
And I am wondering if it'd be worth talking to the surveyor with regard to getting the updated cost on their work, to see if they would be willing to also indicate if it did get broken into 2 phases.
Yeah.
Because all the background record search they do and establishing their control point is going to be reusable.
Right.
So there may not even be a cost
May not be a significant
increase
difference.
of note if we tell them we wanted to break, do it in 2 phases, break it over 2 years, just to get the feedback so we have options to consider.
Yeah, let me do a little bit of pilot survey to find out if there are opportunities for the condo hangars greater or lesser than for the large hangars, the corporate hangars.
I have another kind of line request, kind of as a discussion. For the departments that have large equipment and we're buying old equipment, is there a good line for not just maintenance repair, but a potential breakdown? Are we giving that a dollar amount that we just build into these? Because that was what we dealt with the snow blower, and we went through, it costs, in some ways it costs a little bit more in just when we don't get something fixed, when we have to keep trying to put a Band-Aid on something. So what is and I'm kind of wanting a discussion on how do we plan for the unforeseeable costs associated with aging equipment that will fail without having to say, I didn't budget for a potential negative. Because I think we should start budgeting for a potential negative in these departments that have these items. And this account had that happen.
We could probably look at road and bridge as an example, because I mean, Jason has a line item associated with that.
Road and bridges,
They all have their maintenance as their lines, it's whether or not they're calculating
projection is
what
good.
that is.
That's super important. The problem is it's a zero-sum game with our budget, and if you do put money into a sinking fund for something catastrophic, like EMS, if they have an ambulance or two fail and they have to get new ambulances, it's just not in the budget. Same with the county-wide stuff. And if you do budget for that, it means something else doesn't get budgeted, like it could be, you know, a COLA, it could be whatever else it is. So it is a zero-sum game. It's a rock and hard spot.
so what's the best way to address that kind of issue so it doesn't put unnecessary strain on a budget? Is it that we say 5% of your maintenance is specifically for an unplanned breakdown, so include that in your general maintenance and repair of your items that, because I like the thing on the snow, it's used some years heavily, some years not. And so should there be an amount that is pigeonholed for unforeseen maintenance and repair on something like that?
Well,
And
it was
that
significant, right? Was that last year? The,
2 years ago.
in,
It was $50,000.
yeah, in
Generally,
fiscal year
just for that one
24,
piece of
I think
equipment.
is when it paid, at least when I'm looking at the historical.
And that
So-
was when it paid, that didn't count the Band-Aids that got put on
Yeah.
it. And so it's not that, and then if you were tracking and my mind says if there was a procedure that said 5% of that line is for an unforeseen, and then you didn't have the unforeseen, that you didn't necessarily have to add to it each budget year, but we have to start allowing for unforeseen stuff to happen within the budget lines on that costs. Because in some ways, we wasted some money limping it along because we didn't have the money to actually do the repair. And so we didn't. So that's just my
Yeah,
conversation.
it's a challenge.
So this is sort of like the zero-based budgeting, not the zero-based, but like trying to budget right at it. And so if you don't spend that, you have extra pool cash. If we budget for something like that in every one of our budgets, you could do it, and everybody would be putting 5% a year or whatever. Or, in the alternative, the county could put up a sinking fund, which then could go and snipe any failure across the county. It might end up being less. It would sort of spread the risk a little bit for a failure. It's not a good idea or a bad idea. It's just an idea.
Can we look at the ideas to address large equipment failures in the county? Because I think that the airport is a budget where I felt like we spent money that, because we didn't plan as a county for an unplanned event, which you can plan for unplanned, you just don't know the dollar amount. And so if it makes sense, for example, for it to be that the county created its own sinking fund by which you could say, okay, we didn't need to use it, but we want to keep a threshold available for that eventuality, and then we address it based on who's asking for it. But I think we need to consider, what does that mean?
Yeah, the airport's been the definition of deferred maintenance on a lot of stuff, right,
And-
Dave?
and
I mean, when
that's-
Dave came, actually, he spearheaded and really got a lot of maintenance done. You did a ton of work, but before Dave got here, it was just like next year,
And
not
that's,
this year.
that's
anything
what
but
we
this
have to
year.
stop doing to his budget, because the deferred the maintenance allows them to achieve the grants. And that's what, there's an expectation that we're staying up on what we're supposed to in order to get the money from the FAA. That's the way that that cycle works. And so I don't like hearing, let's defer maintenance again, because then the question is, well, are we a safe airport to fly out? Even though his version of when he's saying deferred maintenance, it's not the safety of the overall airport, it's I can wait to mess with this particular loader until next year. That's what you're meaning, but we can't if we have a big issue, if we hit a huge snowfall, or we have somebody who grades and then they hit the concrete that's on the runway or whatever.
Right.
We have to fix those things. And so I would like us to think about how do we address those kinds of things in the county, and maybe if it lived in the county, then it would make it so that because what I hate is, I don't like the extra money in the account that you don't use, because it's not to be used, it's to be saved for that eventuality.
Encumbered.
Yeah,
We want to encumber some funds so
Yep,
that they're
set it
not
aside.
usable
Yeah.
until.
and maybe it's not in the individual.
Yeah.
So I think that's something as a goal to look at.
So one of the nice things about having been here a long time and having been in the same equipment situation at the airports, in other words, we don't get a lot of new equipment, we have a lot of hand-me-down equipment, is that I have a fairly good history of what those repairs have been over multiple years. And that's what I do, is I go back and look through the last 5 years, and we spent this much money each year on repairs, and it averages out, and then I use that as my dollar amount for repairs. Now, obviously, when you have something catastrophic happen with one of your major pieces of equipment, that blows it up. But on average, we've been pretty accurate, over the course of,
Yeah.
say 10 years. We've been pretty accurate with repairs and maintenance costs. It's just when we do have something that's catastrophic, how do we fund that? And if it's a piece of equipment that would otherwise shut down the airport, which is what the blower is, and that's why we had to do something. If it was one of the dump trucks, I mean, we have other dump trucks, and we can borrow dump trucks. That's not as critical.
Yeah.
But when it's had one very specialized piece of equipment that we use at every snow event, that's why we had to do that. None of us really wanted to, but the alternative was $275,000 for a new one. So we had to spend the 50, and I went back and forth a lot about that, whether we should do that or not. It was the right thing to do at the time. I think that's what we had to do.
But it was the right thing to do, and I think in part that's if we have the option to say, let's try to help plan. I mean, because my other comment to risk is, I want us to look at what are other available options for these types of equipment when they're older that we have, especially after I heard about insuring printers that we don't own. It's what can we do with what we do own on things like that?
Yeah.
I absolutely, it was the right decision to be made, and it did get us through that time. So not any other big sweeping changes, but those two takeaways as, like any, not specific just to airports, but an equipment failure type of savings in terms of the county as a whole, and what would that look like? And then if you'd look at the,
Lease revenue.
Huh?
The lease revenue
Yeah,
side.
yeah, and then the capital improvement issue, and then reaching out to the various levels of pilots within the area of, do they have an interest? And then looking at the survey to include breaking it up on phase 1 versus phase 2, if there's a difference in cost, that way. And then I guess if you break it up from a quote, then you equally have to say phase 1 for the potential of the condo, or phase 2, because one of these phases is the large ones, which is the $1 million investment. And so which one has a stronger appetite? The problem that I foresee having sat with airport people is one of them is a high dollar amount with a fewer number of people. The other one is a lower dollar amount with a lot of people, and the lot of people want their slice of the airport pie. And so that one, to me, is going to be a strong conversation of, if they don't gather their condo groups together, then they're going to they have to show the interest as a group. Because I also reached out after our meeting, I reached out to both Woodward and Souter, who keep sending my phone number to every pilot in Bonner County of this is what was discussed, watch this tape. If you guys have an interest, this is what they came up with.
Yeah, and that's where I'd even say if we had to break it into two phases, if possible, if we did something like lots 17, 18, 19, and 35, we have both scenarios playing out, and we'd be kind of a litmus test with just 4 hangar lot versus something like a 10 hangar lot where we could gauge the level of actual commitment people have to that concept of more of the community-based hangars.
Well, yeah, and in talking with some of the developers that were at the advisory board meeting about, I don't want to extend my
You're
stay too
good.
much.
We went on a couple of rabbit trails.
Yeah. There is, the idea of the condominiumized hangars is good, but just what Commissioner Williams was saying, getting 5 or 10 people together who can have the same vision and the same bank account to do that is going to be difficult.
Right.
So, complicated. So what is likely to happen on those larger ones is that some developer will build them and then sell shares, sell them as condos, right? Which is going to be a much simpler process. So we're still going to have developers in there, but actually if I had to choose between the two, let's say classes of pilot or classes of investors, the developers typically have working capital and are able to do it. So those are the guys that I would probably lean towards to do the first sets on these. I want to give everybody the opportunity because we don't want to ignore any of our local
Yes.
pilots. But just historically, the developer guys have been more successful in that realm.
And I would just want to change the word to airplane condos because I would equally like to not get calls on we let people live at the airport because there's HOAs and it's confusing to everybody because we're using the same terms, but they're not living on the
Right.
airport with homeowners association dues,
Right.
which is equally my phone call on.
Yeah.
Yeah,
But
airplane tenants.
Yeah,
airplane
we have to come up
condos.
with a good term.
It's just we're using
does
housing
not
words.
sound
and
residential.
It is, yeah, it is. That's a lot of,
It's a bit of a challenge.
especially when you have people in the community that say the HOA is building out at the airport.
It shouldn't be an
and
HOA, it
it's-
should be a different terminology.
So, anything further on this budget? No? All right, it is 11:06 and this meeting is adjourned.